And you need to know something about me, which is I get really excited about days set apart like this. I just have found time and time again God speaks to us in a special way. We don't normally do this on a Saturday, so it's just a special moment. God is not more powerful on a Saturday than other days. That's not what I'm saying. But time and again, I've sensed that God pours out his blessing and speaks with particular clarity on occasions that we set apart like this. And it's not that I'll be saying anything that Daniel hasn't wonderfully said. It's not that. It's just we're listening for what God has to say. And so I'm excited. You need to know that. And as I've looked forward to today and prayed about today, I've sensed, this is a special moment. I will speak to you because that's what I've been commanded to do. But it will be a delight for me for it to be conversation. I really would hope that will be the case and that you'll want to come back at me. And particularly, because I'll say quite a few things, if you want to really strongly disagree with me, then it gets far more exciting, and then we can have a real conversation. But please, I'm giving you permission because I want us to engage. Let me say a little bit about who I am, because I think whenever you hear from somebody, you need to know, where they come from and we've already had moments of discovering common places. Brought up in Southend in Essex, and I say that just to get the sympathy vote. I brought up in Westcliff, went to church in Leigh-on-Sea. That's home for me, very definitely home. Haven't lived there for most of my life, but home, you know what home is. Absolutely clear as a young man what I was going to do with my life. Certainly from the age of 12, absolutely clear I was going to be a lawyer. I found the law fascinating. Used to go to the local courts, the Magistrates' Court and the Crown Court, and I just was gripped by the whole process. Used to go up to the Old Bailey, I came from a very loving, sheltered Christian home. Bless them. Wonderful people of prayer, my parents, extraordinary. My father's a businessman in London, a normal couple, but they loved God and were passionate about prayer, and deeply, just an extraordinary example they've set. Not highly educated. Father left school when he was 14, mother when she was 15. My mother went to a private school. The family didn't have much money, but they went to this funny little private school where the object of the school was to enable the young ladies to take afternoon tea nicely. That was the objective of the education, and they succeeded. My mother did take it nicely. Bright people, but they didn't have those opportunities. But anyway, it was a cosseted, loved background. I didn't know about the world. I didn't know about life. However, in the courts of law, particularly in the Old Bailey, I learnt a lot about life, and so went up to university to read law because that was the logic of it. Got there and thought, this is really interesting. I'm not sure I can spend my life doing it. It's really interesting. But anyway, when I was 19 at university, the college chaplain took me in one day, just having a friendly chat, and he said, Jonathan, is the Lord Jesus really the Lord of your career plans? And I can remember everything about that moment. Sitting in his study, looking at the roof of the college buildings beyond, and thinking, I so wish you hadn't asked me that question. Because I thought my career plans were great. I loved God. I wanted to serve God. But I wanted to make a lot of money, and it just seemed to me this was an effective route for doing so. But I love God and whatever. But his question just became very productive for me and disturbed me and led to the baptism of the Holy Spirit. There was something my lovely conservative evangelical background didn't introduce me to, I really didn't know about the Holy Spirit. And in that moment, as a student, I was just filled with the Spirit, started speaking in tongues. Life was changed, life was turned upside down, and so I left university. I just thought, I've got to clear my head, I've got to know what I'm doing in life. So I went to my college and said, if you don't mind, I'd like to leave for a year. And they said, you don't do that. I said, it's unfortunate, because that's just what I'm about to do. My Jewish law tutor was wonderful, and he said, happy to take you back in a year if that's what you decide to do. College chaplain was happy to take me. I was speaking to Regents Park College, and they said, well, we're happy to take you. So I said, I need to leave Oxford for a year. I just need to clear my head. I'm giving up on something that's been important to me for a long time, law. If I'm doing something else, I need to be absolutely clear. So they sent me to Banbury for 1 year to work with Brian Butcher. This is long ago, 1975 to 76. That was a fantastic time. A fantastic time. It of course gave me the opportunity of getting to know this area for the first time. I knew nothing. I came from Essex, so I knew nothing about this area. But I had a wonderful girlfriend at the time who had an Austin A40, a red one, and we used to travel around this area and got to know this area well. Within days of assisting, because I was then just a lowly assistant to Brian Butcher at Banbury, within days it was clear, this is life. This is what I'm called to do. And so I went back to Oxford, and then after a year, and prepared for ministry. From Oxford, went to India for 2 years. I came out of Regents age 23, and I felt I was too young to become a local minister. You know, I still didn't know much about life. I knew more about the Bible. I knew something about life, but I just felt I was too young to become a local minister. So I looked for something else to do, and was sent by the Church Missionary Society, Anglican Society, to South India. For those of you who know India, anybody know India? Well, oh, isn't it lovely? Great, okay. India looks like that, as you know. And I lived in Kerala, bottom left. And I went to work with an outcast development group called the Backward Peoples Development Corporation. Doesn't sound promising, does it? Doesn't sound, but you know, that was the language. These 25% of the population are outcasts. Yeah, they were the backward people. And so I went to live with a backward family, fantastic Christian family in a village. Talk about education. I mean, what they do in Oxford, it's hardly education. This was real education. This is about learning about life, living with, just extraordinary circumstances. Anyway, did a year there, and then worked for a year in the diocesan town where I became chaplain to a large college, 2,000 students. I was the only white man on campus. Everybody knew who the chaplain was, and it worked really well. And I taught Shakespearean comedy as well as being chaplain. I didn't know anything about Shakespearean comedy. Well, no, seriously, but they were every year in the college, whatever you were studying, even physics or chemistry, every year you had to study a Shakespearean play. Isn't that brilliant? So they had a large English department, no Englishman in the department. The head of department was so excited to have a real Englishman teaching it. So I said, well, I don't know anything about it. He said, well, don't worry about that. Just do your mugging up before I'll give you a lovely class, I'll give you the second year MA students, and just do your work before the lecture and it will be fine. So anything I know about Shakespearean comedy, I learnt in India. Hilarious. Speeding up, came to this country, became minister of a church in Suffolk, on a new estate, working out of a community centre. I'd never seen anything like it. It didn't seem legal to me, but it was just a place where people met Jesus in huge quantity. I mean, I think we rarely had to wait more than a month to have somebody else become a Christian, and it was just extraordinary. So that's where my ministry was born, where I got married, first child born. Then for 7 years I was in Orpington in Kent. The reason I went to Orpington was I felt I'd had far too much fun on this housing estate. The church had grown massively to about 300 people, and it was just different. And I thought, I need to find a really boring Baptist church, something just sort of normal, and prove I can be a Baptist minister. And I found it in Orpington. And no, it was brilliant. The organist of the church, we didn't have an organ or anything like that in the community centre, but the organist in Orpington Baptist Church was only the third organist they'd had in a century. Bless him. I mean, it was what I understood to be a typical Baptist church. Orpington, suburbs, well-resourced. It was a great place to be, and a lot of fun, but very different from the community centre life. I then didn't keep my head down and was asked to become superintendent of the Southwest for our Baptist churches in Devon and Cornwall and some of Somerset. It's not a role I really wanted to do, but it was a blessed thing to do. 100 churches, 90 ministers, and a different kind of ministry. Did that for 8 years, and then really didn't keep my head down, and was called to look after what we do nationally, which I did for 7 years as General Secretary of the 2,100 churches that we have. I mean, it all sounds very grand, but it's all teamwork. I mean, you can't be better than your team. It's all about working with other folk, and I did that for 7 years, and then was set free 11 years ago, since which time I've had a portfolio. I love local church. I just love being part of a local church, and so I work with churches normally that are struggling. That's my choice. If a church is being blessed, I think, well, they can do their blessings and somebody else can look after them. But so I go for churches that either just had a breakup or blood up the wall, or just very confused about the future. And I've had a number of churches like that. I like the expression, I walk with churches. I walk with churches. So at the moment I'm transitional minister of Church in the Middle of Swindon. I have a picture, which is probably too far away from you, but right in the middle of Swindon. And it's called, we live in the Pilgrim Centre so built in 1990. Fantastic building, apart from its leaks. Have a 60 people coffee shop on the ground floor, 300-seater auditorium on the first floor, and then offices and meeting rooms for the rest. We're not big, and there are big questions about the future. We'll be 30, 40 on a Sunday morning, sometimes a few more. But we work with a charity that provides breakfast on a daily basis. They get 80 to 100 homeless and food poor people. Had 133 people there for breakfast about 3 Saturdays ago. So we're doing some amazing things, and so I'm doing that. I mentor a number of ministers, and I am trustee of a number of things. I'll say more about that later. But anyway, that's me. But what's most important is that's my family. So married to Sue, who's on the floor, and then Hannah, Beth, and Tom are our children. The girls are married, and Tom is still living with us. So that's my context, and I'm sure. Well, it's clear from nods. Some of you have known different parts of that story, but that's me. But what's really about me, what matters about me, actually is that word that I think people are nervous of using, but of my theology, which would just mean our understanding of God. And I want you to take you to the heart of my understanding of God, because that's actually how we tick, isn't it? If you come at God from a belief that he is severe and overbearing and basically looking to find fault with you, that will affect the way in which you live. If you believe he's gentle and kind and everything's lovely and is actually quite remote on a cloud somewhere, that will affect the way in which you live. If you believe God is at work in you in every second, his Spirit is guiding you and leading you in the moment, that will affect it. But whatever your picture of God, it will shape the person you are. And I'd like to take you, if I can, to Isaiah 43, because for me, this takes me to the heart of my understanding of God. Don't worry if you haven't got it, or if you've got it on your phone, or wherever you have it. But let me just read a few verses. I find this really exciting. So I'm reading from verse 15, Isaiah 43. I am the Lord, your Holy One, Israel's Creator, your King. This is what the Lord says, he who made a way through the sea, a path through the mighty waters, who drew out the chariots and horses, the army and reinforcements together, and they lay there, never to rise again, extinguished, snuffed out like a wick. Forget the former things. Don't dwell on the past. See, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I'm making a way in the desert and streams in the wasteland. The wild animals honour me, the jackals and the owls, because I provide water in the desert and streams in the wasteland, to give drink to my people, my chosen, the people I formed for myself, that they may proclaim my praise. Two things about God. He's a God of salvation. He's a God of salvation. And here we have this wonderful picture of the Exodus. Remember, the people of Israel had been in Egypt for 400 years. 400 years. That's a long time, isn't it? Think of 400 years in this country. We're back to the 17th century. It's another world. 400 years pre-Civil War and all of that. But for 400 years they'd been enslaved in Egypt and they'd been set free. This amazing moment. Suddenly they're released. They can be their own people. I love the poetry of this. He made a path through the mighty waters. He drew out the chariots and horses. I mean, Pharaoh sent 600 chariots. 600 chariots after the people of Israel. I mean, that's a major military initiative. But God's at work. He drew out the chariots and horses, the army and reinforcements together, and they lay there, never to rise again, extinguished, snuffed out like a wick. This is salvation. God doing a complete job of letting his people out of slavery, of setting his people free. And for me, that's the heart of understanding God, of seeing the way in which God has set people free. I think of, through the years, of the way in which I've seen the God of salvation at work. I do think of moments like the conversion of Jimmy in Banbury in 1975. Jimmy came from a totally non-Christian background, didn't know anything about it, met Jesus, and his life was turned upside down. It's incredible. He went to work the next day. He got a load of people sitting around him at lunch. He wanted them to know what Jesus had done in his life, and almost immediately one of his mates from his work in Banbury became a Christian, and his wife then became. I mean, it was extraordinary, and it had a huge effect, well beyond just Jimmy and his mate. And the God of salvation, the God who radically changes people's lives, who enables them to live and be free. I think of other people. I think of my first ministry in in Suffolk. It wouldn't happen in Shipston-on-Stour, but I've found that God has graciously given me people who've been a pain in the neck. I mean, no, it wouldn't. I know it wouldn't happen here, but I mean, Pete was, just a pain in the. Just whatever was happening in the life of the church, he always had the capacity to turn it into an agony. How did he do that? And he came onto the leadership group, and we'd make lovely united decisions. Everything is peaceful. He said, it's great. And I get a call from him the next day and say, I was talking with Jem when I got home last night, and I'm not so sure about it. Just everything was an agony. Bless him. Pete. I won't go into details. We had a service in one of the local, because we were in the community centre, we had a baptism in the local Baptist church one Sunday evening. And Pete was there. Pete was in the gallery. Saw Pete there. Bless. And God met with him. May the 8th. I can't remember the year now, but we've always remembered the anniversary. May the 8th. God spoke with him. God totally changed Pete. Of course, he's had the personality he had before, but God met with him. It's interesting, from that church, I left the church 33 years ago. Pete still keeps in touch, and he reminded me of that anniversary when it came up this year. Salvation. God turning people around. God using people. And Pete, now in his late 70s, got a fantastic ministry in the local prison, local open prison. The Lord is really using him, and it's God of salvation. He changes people, makes them different. I think, for me, the person who's ministered to me most eloquently over the last 2 years, a guy called Mike Heisig. I went to visit Mike. Mike's early 60s. Went to see him a couple of years ago, just chat about life and stuff. It's fine. Sadly, his wife had died of cancer not long before, but Mike's fine. Later on that year, he became not fine. By November 2 years ago, he came to church with a stick. Mike wasn't somebody who came with a stick, but he was finding it difficult to walk. By the following month, December, he had 2 sticks to get to church. By the January, he was in a wheelchair, had motor neurone disease. I've never seen the decline so fast. Mike knew the Lord, and the way in which he was able to speak of his experience of God through his desperate, speedy decline was extraordinary. The way in which he just made clear to everybody how faithful God was, how good God was, right to his end. He died in January of this year, and the last time I went to see Mike, so nearly all his muscles had given out. I held him, I said, reminded him, God is faithful, God will be with you every step of the way, Mike. And I would say it was the last muscle he got going. Just a little smile, no other muscle was working. The God of salvation who's there with us through the wretchedness and the trials and the difficulties of life as well. God of salvation. For me, why have I been delighted to be a minister through these years? Is because God's a God of salvation. He's setting people free to be everything He wants us to be our real selves. Okay? So that's one part of my theology. God's the God of salvation. And I'm sure you're just purring and agreeing, and you've got your own stories to tell. It's brilliant. I've then got a problem. Verse 18 says, forget it. You think, excuse me, we've just been talking about the Exodus. He says, forget the former things. Don't dwell on the past. You think, it must be a misprint. Maybe, it's a printer's error. What's he talking about? Forget it. What does he mean by that? Well, you need to read on, don't you? Forget the former things. Don't dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Don't you perceive it? So we've got to hold two things together. This is the point. God's a God of salvation. He is. But He is also the God of creation. Now, I had a problem with creation because I'd always assumed it was something which happened a long time ago. Whether, and I don't want this conversation, you might, but either the year 4000 BC, 23rd of October, 9 o'clock in the morning, as some people thought, when creation began, or 2.6 billion years ago. I'm not having that conversation. All I will affirm is that God created the heavens and the earth. God is creator. In the beginning, God. That's what I'm absolutely sure of. But whenever we agree it happened a long time ago. And I thought, brilliant, nice job, but it's just historic. What I'd missed out on the fact is that God is still the God of creation. He's still the God of creation. That is to say, by His Spirit, He continues to work creatively. So today is not a frozen moment, it's a moving moment. God is at work doing new things amongst us. This is normal to the whole of life, isn't it? Renewal, regeneration. As you probably know about your body, the cells of our bodies regenerate every 7 to 10 years. But there's a huge amount of variations. You probably know your skin cells are replaced every few weeks. In fact, you lose close to, this is quite a scary number, you lose close to 500 million skin cells every day. Wow. Be careful how you do it. But and the cells in your skeletal muscles, on the other hand, take as long as 15 years to regenerate. But however it happens, we're in a process of continual regeneration, particularly our skin. But that's just a natural process of human life. We're part of a process of renewal. So, and this really is where I want us to do our work together today. It's this theme of renewal. If God is not just a God of salvation, praise God, but He's a God of creation and recreation, the question is, how is He recreating us today? How is He making us new? What's this new thing that God is doing in our lives today? I want to make two major points. Clearly He's saying, don't try and put the clock back. Forget the former things, don't dwell on the past. He's saying, yeah, Exodus was a great moment, but we're not asking God for another Exodus. Oh Lord, can we please take things back to how they were in the Exodus? That's not God's... God is the Exodus God, but He's wanting to set us free in new ways. He's wanting to renew us in new ways. Forget the former things. Don't dwell on the past. Why not? Because I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? Don't try and put the clock back. Yonks ago, I helped out at Upper Holloway Baptist Church in London. Bless. Huge Victorian church. 1,300 seats. Big church. When I was there, working with them as a student in the 70s, there were still people who remembered how if you didn't get there in the 1930s for the evening service early, you might well not get a seat. 1,300 seats to fill. Wow. And I have to say, the memory of that, in a kind of way, wasn't a blessing to the church in the 1970s, because we'd get 30 or 40 people. And I needed to say to them, as I need to say to you, God's vision is not for us to put the clock back, to recreate a world that used to exist. When I looked after the churches in the southwest, I came up with a sort of pop church psychology thinking, which was, because I used to spend my evenings normally with church leadership teams, and by the end of the evening I tried to work out what year they were trying to get back to. Do you know, as if, 1985, or, 1993, stand back, just as if everything would be fine if only we could get back to where things were. And I just want to say that's not God. That's not what he's trying to do. See, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up, don't you perceive it? It is different, and it can be difficult to shape our minds and to think newly and differently. But God's vision is not to turn the clock back, not even to anything as big as the Exodus. He's done that one. Great, well done. He's now got a new agenda for us, so don't try and put the clock back. But the other thing to say is, don't put a limit on God. Why? Because he's a God who does crazy things. He's a God who makes rivers stream in deserts. Well, I don't know what experience you have of deserts. I've bumped into a few on my travels. Deserts are humbling places. They're deeply humbling, but you feel very small wherever you happen to meet them. The idea of a river flowing is just sort of bonkers. But this is our God. He makes rivers flow in deserts. Hear this as a big word of encouragement, because there are times in our Christian lives when we're looking at deserts. We're looking at things where there is no life. And I just want to say to you today, believe in God, the God of salvation, the God of creation, the God of recreation, the God who is able to do new things. One of the churches I've worked with, which really has looked pretty hopeless, I'll name it. I love them very much, but it did look pretty hopeless. Middle of Reading, Abbey Church, Reading, proud history. The congregation, normally in the teens, never hit 20. Lovely people, sweet people, kind people, nice people, older people. Nothing wrong with being older, necessarily. No, I mean, but a small church, on the face of it, in the middle of town, high-rise office blocks all around. It just didn't feel great, I have to say. You go there now. Do go there now if you have the opportunity. And we're only just 3 or 4 years since that story would have been told. Give it 4 years. There'll be about 150 people there. As you come to the door, you'll be offered the order of service in English, in Farsi, because there are so many Iranians, or in Chinese, in Mandarin. Lots of Hong Kongers there, and about 150 people. I mean, 4 years. It's a recent story. 4 years ago, you'd have thought, bless them, nice people. It just looked hopeless. But God's at work. God has done a new thing, a completely new thing. It's wonder. I just love being there to see what God has done. Don't look at a situation. I warn you, don't look at a situation and say, oh, it's just desert, hopeless, approved, with a label on it, it's hopeless. Don't do that, because we're dealing with the God of salvation, but also the God of creation, the God who does new things. Can I make this personal for a moment? Because probably all of us are inclined to look at some of the people we know and think, they're never going to become a Christian. They're never going to meet with God. Not, you may be thinking of a child, grandchild, spouse, neighbour, and just say, dream on. They're never going to meet with God. I just want to remind you, we're dealing with this kind of God. God who makes rivers flow in the middle of deserts. If he can do bonkers things like that, he can do a miracle with the people you know. Don't you love the fact that the big conversion in the New Testament is bonkers? Saul, of all people. Saul, who was such a committed Jew, and don't forget that's his identity. He's so serious about his Jewish faith. He's determined to destroy the Christian church. Not because he was a nasty person. I'm sure he wasn't. Highly educated. He just was passionate about his Jewish faith. Goes to the trouble of getting letters to give him authority to go to Damascus in order to suppress any Christians who might have turned up. And God takes this man. There was no chance. Surely there was no chance. He was far too committed to this way ever to change. But he meets God. Everything changes. I've set up my stool. I think you can see where I'm coming from. This is my God. This is my theology. Yes, a God of salvation. But crucially, a God of creation, a God of recreation who's seeking to do new things.